Hello and welcome to or back to my library. Today we're going over all the books that I read in January. I started the year off with a bang. I had a fantastic reading month. I've been in such a huge mood to read and I am fully embracing that. So let's get right into it with the stats. So in January I read a grand total of 19 books, DNF'd 3, and that gave me a grand total of 6,775 pages with 74 and a half hours of audiobook listening. I love that for me. What a great way to start off the year. So we'll start with my DNFs as always. So I DNF'd A Fellowship of Bakers and Magic, which was the pick for the Cozy Quill book club that I'm part of. I got maybe 15% of the way through, I'm gonna guess. I kind of forget right now, but I gave it like a decent shot and I just wasn't really vibing with it. I liked the writing style for the first little bit and then it quickly became a bit too much for me personally. I found it was kind of overwritten and a bit dramatic, and I liked the main character and the two friends that she had, but as soon as the love interest was introduced, I was immediately no longer interested in the book and DNF'd it pretty quickly after that. I also DNF'd Lightlark by Aster, which was the pick for the in-person book club that I'm part of. I got maybe 15 pages into this one and was immediately not feeling it. It was also quite overdramatic and theatrical in a way that I really dislike, and it was just kind of everything that I dislike about YA. So maybe it would have gotten really good if I continued, but I was just really not vibing with it. And then finally, I also DNF'd All of Us Murderers by KJ Charles, partially because the audiobook, I was not a fan of the narrator, but I'm also not a huge murder mystery fan, and I was kind of giving it a shot, but again, just wasn't vibing with it, so I cut my losses with that one. Moving on to the books that I did read, starting with the ones that I do not give ratings to. I don't give ratings out for nonfiction and poetry, of which there were 3 this month. So I read Harlem Shadows by Claude McKay, which is a book of poetry published in the 1920s, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, 1922. This was beautiful. Definitely one of my favorite poetry books that I've read. I don't really know how to talk about poetry, which is why I don't give it ratings, so I'm just going to leave that there, but if you like poetry, definitely give this one a go. I also read The Cree Word for Love by Tracey Lindberg and George Littlechild, which is a nonfiction exploring the concept of love in Cree culture, and had a pretty good time with this one. The story structure made it a little bit hard to follow at times, but overall this was a pretty solid read as well, but I don't think it's one that I'll think about for a long time. The last of the nonfictions was Unbuild Walls by Silky, Shah. This one is a nonfiction on immigration injustice in the United States, and this was a phenomenal read. It was very informative, very eye-opening, heartbreaking, challenging book, but definitely one that was worth the read. It was a little bit hard to follow because there were so many acronyms thrown in there, and the author did say what the acronym stood for the first time that it was mentioned, but every time after that was just the acronym. So reading it as a Canadian who doesn't have those acronyms as part of my everyday life, it was a bit hard to follow, but I feel like an American reading this would probably have an easier time following along. But overall, fantastic book and definitely an important one to pick up as well. I had no 1 or 1.5 stars this month, so love that for me, but sadly I did have a 2-star. The first time in quite a while that I've had a 2-star read, because I normally DNF long before I finish a book that I think is going to be 2 stars, but that one was After the Forest by Kell, and the only reason why I didn't DNF it is because it was the only book on my TBR that fit both of the buzzword reading challenges for this month, both the regular one and the covers edition, so I kept reading it because I didn't want to have to find 2 other books to fit those prompts, so I just stuck with it and I had a pretty miserable time with it. Thinking back, there's not much that I can remember being good about this book. I guess the atmosphere was pretty solid. I liked the setting of it. This one follows Hansel and Gretel when they're adults, and there's also werewolves involved, and it was just kind of a mess. The plot felt like it was so chaotic and completely nonsensical. I felt like I was reading 3 different books at once, and I just really didn't enjoy my time with this one. I had no 2.5-star reads, but I had 2 3-star reads, starting with We Can Never Leave This Place by Larocca. This one is a horror novel, and had I known that it was splatterpunk, I probably wouldn't have picked it up because it was vile. I picked it up on a whim on my train ride home from Toronto one day when my phone was dying and I just wanted to have something to read, and it's been on my Kindle for a long time. I don't really know when I bought the book, but I guess at some point I bought it. I don't know when, but whatever. But yeah, I read it and it was really gross. I will give it that it was very compelling, and I kind of had a hard time choosing a rating for this one because as a story, I really didn't enjoy the story part of it. It just didn't make enough sense for me to personally enjoy it. I don't really like being confused the entire way through a book, and especially by the end, I want things to make sense. And the ending of this one actually made things more confusing. So plot-wise, I really didn't like it, but as a horror novel, it was very effective. I was getting like visceral reactions. I was reading it in public and can only imagine the faces that I was making thinking. So it definitely got a reaction out of me, and it was very compelling as well. I kept turning pages. I was locked into this book. So reading experience wise, it was pretty good, but actual story, not so much. So I settled on a 3-star. My other 3-star was A Game in Yellow by Hailey Piper, which follows a couple who are kind of having a hard time in their sex life. They're already very deep into the BDSM world and things just aren't quite enough for the main character. So her girlfriend finds out about this book where if you read just a little bit, there's some sort of magic involved that gives you this euphoria. But if you read too much of it, bad things are going to happen. So the story just follows this couple as they're navigating their relationship after this book is introduced to them, and things get very, very messy. This was good in a lot of ways. I did like the relationship in here. I thought it was really interesting. It was very complex. Neither of these characters are good people, but neither of them are bad people either. So it just felt very real in that sense. I liked how gritty this book felt as well. It was very atmospheric in that way, so definitely a plus on that one. But the actual plot of it was not really for me. I'm not really sure what about it just wasn't working, but for some reason the plot of it was not keeping my attention, and I struggled to kind of follow what was going on throughout most of it, especially towards the end where things kind of descended into absolute madness. I had no idea what was going on, and at some point I just kind of gave up trying to figure it out and just was along for the ride for the rest of the book, and I had a decent time but not a fantastic time with it. My 3.5 stars started with Mate by Ali Hazelwood, which is the sequel to Bride. This is a werewolf romance and it was pretty good. I had a good time with it, but it's not one that I'm going to think about like at all. I've already kind of forgotten everything that I liked or disliked about it, to be honest, but it was a book that I read at least. I also gave 3.5 stars to Rewitched, which I have very similar feelings about. This one is a contemporary witchy romance that has to do with a witch who is going for her like 30th birthday witch trials to find out if she's allowed to keep her magic or not, which is an interesting plot by itself, but at the same time there was also a plot where the bookstore that she worked at had a whole bunch of issues and she was thinking about maybe buying it and kind of dealing with all that stuff, which is also an interesting plot, but the two of them mushed together felt like way too much. This really should have been 2 different books, I thought, and actually I found the plot with the bookstore to be a lot more interesting. I also really didn't like the romance in here. I thought the main character was so mean to the love interest, just for no reason. Like, she was constantly putting him down and making him feel bad about himself, and I really did not vibe with that, especially because it did turn into a romance and I didn't understand how. There was zero chemistry between them, in my opinion. So yeah, decent time, but not one that I'll think about, and I'm probably not going to read the companion book to this one either. I gave 3.5 stars to Our Share of Night, which I am a little sad about. I was hoping that this one would be a higher rating just because it was so freaking long. If I'm going to commit that much time to a book, I would have loved to have been obsessed with it. But while I was not obsessed with it, I did find it compelling still, even though plot-wise I really didn't have any clue what was going on for a good chunk of the book. I was just kind of along for the ride with it. But for some reason, I just kept listening and was still enjoying it despite not really knowing what was going on. The characters in this one were fantastic. The character work was very well done. I liked where things went with everybody and the relationships that were formed. This book jumped through timelines quite a bit and kind of bounced between different characters and POVs in a way that was confusing but also really interesting and kept me listening. This is a book that you really had to pay attention to, and I did my best but didn't always succeed, and I think that's where I got lost with it sometimes. But overall, this was a very well written book. The atmosphere was fantastic and it was sufficiently creepy as well. Heart of Flames by Nicki Preto. This is the sequel to Crown of Feathers and has to do with sisters and phoenix riders and magic and a whole bunch of cool stuff. This one was also quite long. It was a very chunky book. This was a month full of big books apparently. I quite enjoyed this. I think I liked it a little bit better than the first book in terms of the plot, but I liked book 1 better for the setup and kind of being introduced to the world and everything. There's always that spark of magic when you're discovering a new fantasy world for the first time, which is difficult to continue that feeling into the second book in a series, but sometimes it still works, but not so much the case in this one. So while I really enjoyed this book and will definitely read the last book of the series, it was missing that spark a bit for me. I also gave 3.5 stars to We Hunt the Flame by Tahereh Mafi. I'm like the last person in the world to read this book, and I was hesitant to read it because it is YA, and I don't really read YA a whole lot anymore, but I was pleasantly surprised by this one. It was fast-paced and interesting. I really, really like the magic system and the world that was introduced in this book. However, the romance could have been completely absent and I would have been much happier for it. It was quite insta-love and that is really not my vibe. But aside from that, this is very interesting and I can't wait to continue on with the series, hopefully very soon. My last 3.5 star was The Bruising of Qilwa by Naseem Jamnia. This one is a Persian-inspired fantasy that has to do with a blood mage and a plague that is sweeping the city that they're trying to figure out the cure for. I loved the characters in this book. I thought they were so interesting and so well done. The relationships in here were very complex and well thought out, especially for being a very small novella. This was only about 180 pages, but there was a lot of really good character work packed into there. These were very realistic feeling characters. This was also very queer in a queer normative world, and I loved that so much, especially the use of magic for gender affirming care. It was very interesting to read about that. Plot wise, I did get a bit lost here and there, but otherwise I very much enjoyed this one as well. My 4 stars for the month began with Through Gates of Garnet and Gold by Shah McGuire, which is the newest book in the Wayward Children series, which is my favorite series in the entire world. I actually got an ARC for the audiobook for this one, and it was my first book of the year. I didn't love this book as much as I was hoping I would. It felt more like a very long prologue than an actual book. As a whole, it sort of just felt like a filler novel, but I am excited to find out where this goes from here, because this book is kicking off a new plot line in this series that I am really excited for. I think the next couple of books are going to be very interesting, and I am so hyped to see where it goes from here. And of course, it was lovely to see these characters again. So it's definitely not my least favorite in the series by any means, but nowhere near my favorite either. I think it kind of falls somewhere in the middle. I also gave 4 stars to Stay in the Light by A.M. Shine, which was a huge surprise for me. This is the sequel to The Watchers, which I did an episode of Page to Screen for sometime last year, where I read the book and watched the movie, and I didn't particularly enjoy either the book or the movie. I thought that it was kind of bad, to be honest, but the book at least had really good potential. So I wanted to read book 2 and see if things improved, and it definitely did. The thing that book 1 was missing was the tension, and book 2 did a fantastic job with that. This was genuinely really creepy. It had me kind of looking over my shoulder and feeling like I was being watched all the time. So definitely a huge success for this one. The ending, however, left off on a cliffhanger, and so far there's no mention of a book 3. And if there's not going to be a book 3, I'm going to be upset. There needs to be a book 3 for this one. I gave 4 stars to Love at First Fright by Nadia El-Fassi, who's the author of Best Hex Ever, which I read last year and absolutely adored. It was one of my favorite romances that I read last year, or just in general. I loved that book so much. This one was also really good, but not quite as good as Best Hex Ever, but still a fantastic read. This one is a paranormal romance that follows a horror author who is also able to see ghosts, and one of her books is being turned into a movie, but she is not a fan of the person who was chosen for the lead role. But while she's on set, they have to work pretty closely together, and of course sparks fly from there. This was a great book. It was so much fun. It was funny and heartwarming. The main characters are also involved in a BDSM relationship, and it was really nice to see a healthy, positive portrayal of that kind of dynamic, so I very much appreciated that as well. It got a 4-star instead of a bit higher because I was lacking some emotional connection to it, but overall this was still a fantastic book, and I will continue to read books from this author in the future. Next up is Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen, which is a YA mermaid fantasy about a young girl who was turned into a mermaid by the Orisha gods after she died, and her job is to find the souls of enslaved people who were thrown overboard and guide their souls home. But one day she finds someone who is still alive and ends up saving his life, which sets off this whole plotline. This was a very fast-paced, interesting, engaging book that I actually quite enjoyed. This is one of those books where I'm glad that I still try YA once in a while, because I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so well written. I loved the plot of this one, the magic, the world, everything about it is so good. I, again, don't love the romance in it, but that's not a surprise to me. I often don't love romance, especially when it comes to YA, but overall a great book, and I can't wait to read the sequel as well. The last of my 4 stars was The Unbound by VE Schwab, which is the sequel to The Archived. It's a paranormal fantasy essentially about ghost hunting, sort of, but way cooler than that. Book 1 I wasn't the biggest fan of because it was written in 2013, and that was abundantly evident. And the second book definitely still was, but not as bad. So book 2 was for sure better than the first book, but if it weren't for the fact that this was written by V.E. Schwab, I definitely wouldn't have read it. But I do want to at some point read all of their books, so that's why I picked it up. And I'm not mad that I did. Like, it wasn't a bad series, but it just wasn't memorable for me. But at least I can cross it off the list now. Finally, my 4.5 stars, I had 2 of them, starting with Game Changer by Rachel Reed, which is the first book in the series that the Heated Rivalry TV show is based on. I have been completely completely obsessed with the TV show. I watched it in late December and I'm already rewatching it right now, and I want to devour this entire series, but I'm holding off. I want to savor it, but I read the first book at least in January and had a blast with it. It was so perfect. If I were to objectively give this a rating, it would be more like a 4, possibly even a 3.5, because the dialogue is sometimes kind of awkward and clunky a little bit. But my overall enjoyment and obsession, I have to give this a 4.5 star. I had so much fun reading this book. It brought me to tears on multiple occasions. I loved it so much, and I can't wait to continue this series in the coming months, and of course continue to rewatch the TV show over and over again. And finally, the last book was The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, which is the first book in the Bloodsworn saga. I'm reading this one with the Catch-Up Book Club hosted by Becca and the Books. I was so scared of this book because it's ginormous and a very dense Viking fantasy, but I'm so glad that I picked it up. It was phenomenal. This book had me gripped from start to finish. There were a few moments throughout the middle of it where I was kind of feeling a bit bored, but overall this was such a fantastic book, and I'm so happy that I picked it up. There were moments where I was freaking out, and there were twists and turns in here that I did not see coming, and had an absolute blast with it. I'm desperate to read book 2, but I have to wait for the book club, so I'll be reading book 2 in the next couple of months, and that time cannot come fast enough. I need book 2 like right now. But there we have it. Those are all the books that I read. Before we go, let's get into the superlatives. So the best book that I read in January was hands down The Shadow of the Gods. This was so good. The worst book was absolutely After the Forest. I did not enjoy that book, and I feel bad for even finishing it, but it is what it is. Biggest surprise was definitely Stay in the Light. I did not expect to have such a good time with that one after the mild disaster that was the first book. Biggest disappointment, I would say, would be A Game in Yellow, because I love a book about BDSM, and this one could have been really good but ended up being kind of messy. Most memorable has to go to Game Changer because of the way that I lost my mind reading this book. Most forgettable, I would say, is a tie between Rewitched and Mate. Best audiobook is kind of a tough one because none of the audiobooks really stood out for me a whole lot this month, but I'll give it to Love at First Fright because I liked the narrator for that one. And then prettiest cover has to go to Skin of the Sea. This is a stunning cover. But that'll do it for this video. Let me know down in the comments what books you read last month, your best, your worst, all of the above. I would love to hear your thoughts down below. But in the meantime, thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and I'll catch you in the next video.